morning to those in the United States and good afternoon to those of you joining us in Europe and beyond. My name is Johan Fleck and I'm the Senior Director of the Europe Center here at the Atlantic Council, and it is my pleasure to introduce today's AC front page discussion with the European Commission's Executive Vice President for a Clean, Just and Competitive Transition, Teresa Ribera. Madam Executive Vice President, welcome to the Atlantic Council. Executive Vice President Ribera has been in her current role since December 2024, and her portfolio is as expansive as her title suggests. She is tasked with implementing the bloc's Green Deal, realizing the continent's climate targets, driving forward Europe's decarbonization, and supporting the EU's industrial policies. She's also the EU's competition chief, notably overseeing the enforcement of the Digital Markets Act. All of these issues, the EU's competitiveness agenda, industrial push, and decarbonization efforts are central not only to the future of the European Union, but also to the US-EU economic partnership, a $9.5 trillion trade and investment relationship. But it is no secret that the EVP's visit comes at a challenging moment for transatlantic relations. Most immediately, as everyone here will be aware, President Trump's announcement yesterday of tariffs to be levied against trading partners around the world will carry serious implications for the US-EU economic relationship. We're also seeing divergence on climate and green policies, and the EU faces a need to revamp its own competitiveness in the face of shifting geopolitics and global economic realities. The transatlantic economic relationship is an issue we watch closely here at the Atlantic Council and the Europe Center. So, Madam Executive Vice President, there's much to talk about. And I'm very much looking forward to your remarks and then the conversation to follow, which will be moderated by our distinguished fellow, Fran Burwell. So thank you again, Executive Vice President Ribera, for being here with us. The floor is yours, and then we'll get into a conversation. Thank you for being with us.
Good morning and good afternoon. In this transatlantic opportunity to comment on so many important things, I would say that it is a great pleasure. Thanks a lot for inviting me to be with you this morning. You're a driving force in promoting dialogue, in insisting and underscoring the importance of the transatlantic relation. It's been always important. It is particularly important nowadays. And I pick the motto you use when you refer to this institution: shaping the global future together. And I guess that this is what all is about, how we can shape the global future together. Just to start insisting on the fact that up to now, we have performed reasonably well in this effort to shape the global future together. And we in Europe believe that this is very important. We have dedicated lots of efforts along decades to build a better future, to shape a multilateral order based on rules in cooperation, trying to identify how we can create wealth and prosperity all over the world. And we have used the tools that we understood were more promising and effective. We identified dialogue, multilateralism, diplomacy to build prosperity, to invest in equality, in peace, in security, to provide opportunities to our societies, and to improve the quality of life all over the world. We have identified trade, as it has always been the case, a powerful tool, an instrument to know each other much better, to exchange products and services, and it comes from our ancestors. Trade was the origin of establishing good relations between neighbors, to build the Mediterranean cultures, to bridge Europe with Asia with Marco Polo, to build prosperity all over the world, peace, knowledge, wealth creation, democratic values right now, respect. And yes, it is probably something that deserves constant attention, how we reshape global trade, local trade, bilateral, bi-regional, how we take care of the important macroeconomic figures, and at the very same time, we do not forget the local contents, the elements that may be important for the local communities, for the citizens. So to speak, not only in terms of big figures, but also in terms of human scale. So it's certain that we can update the way we relate each other. And it is important to do it with the intention to improve the quality of the relationships between all of us, paying attention to the global challenges that we still face. We know that we still need to face terrorism, insecurity, war instead of peace in many places in the world, nuclear proliferation with no security control that may become a problem, we hope not, climate change as a threat that turns us back in terms of development in many countries, creates suffer, destroys built infrastructure, creates death and hunger. So I guess that we should concentrate on those things that allow us to speak with pride over joint successes. For instance, Europe and North America and the United States of America became the world's largest humanitarian donors to eradicate poverty, to provide opportunities all over the world, to ensure that the world was the best place to live in. And this has been constructed, built along decades. You were providing some figures that are very impressive. The European Union and the US markets worth $1.7 trillion in 2023. We are the most interconnected markets in the world. We have been able to develop many of the solutions to provide responses to the questions of our time. We have done it in such a way that we have bet on a balanced approach, diversified approach, sustainable approach, building on economic security of our societies, building on the capacity to ensure confidence to our companies, to our business communities, to ensure that they could count on any of us to develop these trade flows in a very easy way. I could say that this has been an incredible joint adventure in the last decades. As I said, a story of success based on trust and cooperation. So, our bet could be not to weaken, but on the contrary, to strengthen the capacity we have demonstrated to act together to provide a better future for the citizens. And certainly for that, it's good to count on supply chains that work, on markets that work and are predictable, and avoiding raising costs, fueling inflation, or delaying the response to things that are still quite a challenge. This is what we could be concentrated on, how we can reduce poverty, how we can avoid global recession, how we can face the climate threat, how we can invest on a better governance, democracy, values, aspirations of people all over the world. We could think about working in the G7 context, in the G20 context, in the OECD context. We could think on how we can provide financial stability. We could think on how we can provide room for innovation, to avoid overcapacity in production of certain goods, to invest in the skills of the labor force, the people, to work on preparedness. This is still our dream as Europeans. This is still how we understand the external dimension of our policies, how we can work with the rest of the world the same way we have been working during these last years, these last decades. How we can identify the partners that are ready to come in to develop solutions for the existing problems. But at the same time, we take note of what it is going on, and we know that according to our priorities, we need to bet on security, we need to bet on competitiveness, we need to insist that we that we support our values. So we have entered into a period where we have concentrated our efforts to see how we could build further competitiveness in the European economy, how we could ensure that the traditional basic industries could become increasingly competitive, that we can bet on the most promising new industries, that we can count on the right people, on the right finance, on the right skills, on the right relations, on the availability of raw materials, on the capacity to provide room for innovation, on the attractiveness to invest in Europe. And we have counted on relevant assessments, also to identify where we can improve domestically. For instance, Christine Lagarde, an European citizen that you know very well, who knows very well the United States and who cares about performance of the economy. She was saying, closer integration of the European Union with the rest of the world could more than offset losses incurred from US unilateral tariffs. Investments to overcome the internal borders could help into a much more better working economy at the European level. So again, external policies and internal policies can help us to improve our economy and to raise additional competitiveness. Yes, we count on more than 450 million citizens, so a huge single market. Barriers inside the single market equal tariffs around 45%, while across the United States may mean 50%, and if we speak about services, it could equal 110% amount in terms of tariffs. So let's try to deepen into the single market. Let's try to keep on building our capacities in Europe. This is what it is reflected in our main strategic paradigm papers, the Competitiveness Compass and the Clean Industrial Deal, because we want to bet on an affordable energy system that does not rely on something that we do not produce, but that does provide the adequate energy cost for our industry to be much more competitive. We want to bet on a capacity to combine public and private funding and a well-functioning financial market that lower the cost of capital, that count on the banks being supported by the European Investment Bank, so the guarantees to be innovative and to develop the investments and the infrastructures that could be required for the time to come. We want to count on the support and the right signals for what we could call the lead markets, why the public procurement should not recognize the relevance of reinvesting in innovation, of the footprint in terms of carbon, or the green production of those goods that could become long-lasting competitive industrial solutions. How we can count on the predictability and open system that could ensure availability of materials that may be produced internally or recovered internally. So paying attention to the green circular economy to ensure that the scraps become used to produce metals, or that other resources could be reused in different industrial production solutions. How we can make use of the external agenda to ensure that the availability of these resources, when it is not the case at the European scale, can be used in this diplomatic manner to ensure co-development and partnerships with third countries. How we can count on the skilled workforces in Europe, the preparedness, the trainees, the retraining and reskilling of the people, the new dimensions that could be required by the industrial and service community. So to summarize, yes, we think that the green driver is a green driver for further competitiveness, that the dialogue and the co-construction is a driver for a peaceful creation of wealth, that the bridges that we need to build are based on the capacities and the demands being stressed by the society, and that in order to get them, it is much more easier to build bridges than to build barriers. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Madam Executive Vice President, for those remarks. We're going to have a bit of a conversation up here, and then we're going to open the floor to questions. So there are people running around with microphones. For those of you who are watching online, please go to askac.org, and you can ask your question, and it will come up on my little iPad here. So we look forward to seeing a lot of questions coming up, both in the room here as well as online. Before moving to a discussion of the clean and just transition, I think we need to ask about the elephant in the room, and that is President Trump's announcement of further tariffs on not just the EU, but specifically the EU yesterday. We now have 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum, 25% on car parts, and 20% blanket. Will the EU retaliate? We've heard a lot of talk here about the anti-coercion instrument, and I know that there's a lot of discussion going on in Brussels right now. What's the process? When should we expect to see a reaction?
No, thank you. Thank you for the question. I think that this is bad news for the whole world, including the Americans, by the way, the American business and the American consumers. And of course, we will defend the Europeans, the European business, and the European citizens. And in order to defend, the first thing that we should bear in mind is that the best thing is to avoid the big clash. So, of course, we will remain firm and open. So to see if there are rooms to solve any type of misunderstanding and avoid conflict, but we will defend ourselves in case this is not the final assessment. And there may be different means. I think that that's part of the exercise to understand exactly what it is being expressed in the statements being made yesterday, to identify with the different sectors what it could mean and what is the right answer, both in terms of the tools that may be the direct response to that in the World Trade Organization context, in terms of reciprocity, or in terms of other measures that can be adopted. But for the time being, I think that the most important message is that, as the President von der Leyen stated this morning, we are assessing, we will be firm, open to dialogue, but of course, this is not good news.
And to follow up on that, let me ask you the broader question of what does this tariff announcement say about the future of the global trading system? And what does it mean for the EU's own role in that? You've just concluded at least the signatures of the Mercosur agreement, although it's not yet ratified, and you're negotiating with India. Does this tariff announcement alter the EU's trade strategy or what it sees as its role in the global trading system?
Well, I think that what it means, what we heard yesterday, is that what it has changed is the US, not the rest of the world. So what we will try to do, of course, as Europeans, because we are stick to our values, because we trust in multilateral order, in the multilateral order and the cooperation, we will keep on developing and deepening the relationship with the rest of the world, because we think that it is worthy to defend what we have built together during the last 80 years, a multilateral order-based rules, including trade. This means that, yes, there are other markets. The European-US market is the biggest market that we have been able to develop in the whole world, but the whole world is bigger or larger than the US market. So yes, of course, we will try to keep on building that. That doesn't mean that we can absorb everything that is produced in whatever part of the world, but I think that part of our responsibility is to be coherent, to remain truth to our own values, and to keep on building and deepening the relation with the rest of the world, which is probably as surprised and as deceived as many other European or American citizens may be.
Mm. So you're here in Washington to speak at a couple of conferences on competition policy, which is a part of your portfolio. There seems to be a growing debate in Europe about competition policy and how it fits with the other big priority in Europe, which is competitiveness. And especially how to reconcile the need to have open markets in Europe, but to still have big enough companies that they can be leaders on the global stage. You have a review of competition policy coming up. Should we expect more flexibility in how the Commission evaluates cases? I mean, just a hypothetical, would Alstom-Siemens perhaps be looked at a bit differently now? I mean, this is something that a lot of companies will care about as we move forward, and it seems to me that growing not national champions, but European champions, if you want to use that phrase, is going to be a key part of competitiveness. So what does that mean for competition?
We live in a world where it is not anymore Western countries stating the size of the market, the demand, and the offer. The world, because everybody is willing to have a better future, has improved, become much more complicated, and also much more interesting in terms of how different product services are appearing here or there, not just in our countries. And this means that the scale has changed. So when we think about what is the relevant market to be taken into consideration to assess if a merger operation can take place or not, this has evolved, this has changed. And this is part of what we want to find out. To what extent we need to review the guidelines to assess in a quick manner, because that also counts, being simple and quick, not to delay any type of decision that may have an economic impact in the operators. It can be updated. That is part of what we could call the evolution, the natural evolution of the competition policy dealing with mergers. As it is the case in other competition tools that are important. I think that the economic reality, the assurance of the level playing field, the competitiveness being based on the possibility to count on innovators finding a place in their markets, challenging the current incumbents, may be covered by the institutions. So yes, we are bound by this demand coming from the Parliament and the President of the Commission to make the competition policy evolve, to make an updated assessment of what are the market forces that we need to take into consideration, so to identify how the competition tools can help into a much more competitive, green, and just industrial reality, how there may be players that not so far ago were competing in a certain local space and now compete at the global scale, or how we can avoid foreign subsidized investments that may be unfair for those industrial players that try to produce their goods in Europe with a high standard in terms of environmental or social protection.
So one of the things that you have in your war chest, so to speak, is the foreign subsidies regulation. Do you expect much change in that as well? Or will it be part of the overall competitiveness revision or review?
Well, this is something that was adopted in the previous mandate that has started to work. And we pay attention to the due process and to decisions based on evidence, that's for sure. But yes, we need to pay attention and to cover a loophole, if we can call it this way. There were the traditional trade policy measures, the understanding of how we could implement the World Trade Organization regulation, but at the very same time, we realized that in certain occasions, we did not have the right tools to assess to what extent there may be something that was going to be working in Europe with a big back coming from a foreign government that did not go through the traditional evaluation of the state aid policies to be sure that there were not overcompensations and that the final prices were fair and reflecting the real costs. So if we want to be fair, we need to count on tools that could allow us to assess to what extent there may be this unfairness happening. And this is already functioning, and we are learning.
So there has been a good track record of at least consultation between US and EU competition authorities. And you're also responsible for enforcing the Digital Markets Act, which has gotten a lot of airtime from the Trump administration, I would say. And yesterday, the head of the US Federal Trade Commission, Andrew Ferguson, remarked about the DMA. I definitely don't want the Europeans basically levying taxes on American firms. The fines under the DMA are not tied to the business being conducted by the firm in Europe. What's your reaction to that? And during your visit here, have you had the opportunity or seen the opportunity for ongoing consultations with US competition authorities?
Yes, I've had this opportunity, and of course we are open to respond or to clarify any misunderstanding, but I'm sure that when the American administration takes a decision in terms of how to ensure the enforcement of an American regulation or an American tax, they do not pay attention to the origin of the company that they are taxing. Right. They pay attention to where they work, where they get their profits, and what users in America deserve protection. So I think that there may be some type of misunderstanding. But what it is truth is that the Digital Markets Act is not intending to go against anyone, but to ensure that there is room to facilitate protection for users, but also capacity to provide space in a market that cannot become monopolies against new innovators that could challenge the existing incumbents. And we apply it in our territory to protect our consumers. And of course, I could say in this front-runner position that we've got and that has been followed by many other national authorities, including, by the way, with a long-standing nice cooperation with the federal administration in the US. Back in the Trump 1 administration, I could guess that what we identify as common points is the American federal administration paying attention to the protection of the American users, and we paying attention to the European users. So to be clear how we can provide this upfront identification on how the gatekeepers, how the big companies can behave to avoid creating situations that could be increasingly difficult to be challenged by users or new incomers.
Right. So let's move to the other part of your portfolio, which is the clean and just transition. During the last commission, we saw a lot of legislation to ensure that the EU would move to a decarbonized economy. And you talked about some of the ambitions there. But we've also seen a lot of criticism from business about overregulation. And both the Draghi and the Letta reports kind of poked at that as well. Particularly with this emphasis on competitiveness now. And then we've had the omnibus proposal, which has delayed the implementation, or if accepted by Parliament and the Council, will delay the implementation of some of these rules, such as corporate sustainability, due diligence and reporting, and reduce the scope of CBAM, for example, or the number of companies involved in it. Are you all walking back the Green Deal? I mean, is this something that is, were you too ambitious in the previous commission and now you have to, reality is hitting? What do you see as the relationship between regulation, potentially overregulation, and competitiveness in this area of the Green Deal?
So, to your first question, I could say that no, of course not. We are not going to undoing our assessment on why the green framework does help competitiveness. On the contrary, we think that this is the main driver. And there are other geographies in the world that identified that a long time ago and today have a big share of the international market dealing with green equipments. The European Union is the second one, but in relative terms, we have grown up from 20% of the market back in 2019 in terms of green goods and equipments up to 23, 24. But there is someone
market or the global
market.
Global markets, okay.
But there are others that came from around 1920 up to 34. So we don't want to miss the train anymore. We think that this is the main driver. We all humans want to live better, and the resources are the resources that we have. So we need to be very efficient in the use of the resources, and this means introducing the green driver as a driver for further competitiveness. What it is true is that when we enter into the concrete details of the regulation, everybody wants to express every single concern in the final result. And this may become a little bit too crowded. So simplification is very important. And this afternoon, European time, the European Parliament has backed this stop the clock and simplified approach to something that was already demanded by the financial system. I mean, anyone willing to invest wants to know what are the risks of liability, the risk of cost, the best investments that they can make. And for that, understanding, learning on how to differentiate between green value or acceptance of risk is important. So the important thing is to keep the sense, the purpose, and to facilitate the means to achieve the same goals.
Okay. So we can start the Q&A here in the room. And I see one already right there. So where are the microphones? Please stand up and identify yourself.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Shane Tews with the American Enterprise Institute. With all the news yesterday, are you guys considering a digital services tax or tariff that would be a way of a retaliation on what the Trump administration is putting forward?
Well, I think that it is a little bit early. I think that we need to get into a deeper understanding on what is the proposal, not the proposal, the statements being made yesterday by President Trump before entering into any type of concrete discussion. What it is clear is that we are not going to open our regulation dealing with key aspects of how we understand the way the economy and the society in Europe could perform better. But I think that we will have time to come back to a deeper assessment.
So let me also say that Spain is one of the countries that the U.S. trade rep identified as one with a DST. And that's the country that you know best. We don't know whether if anything about the DST specifically was included in the non-tariff barriers calculation, or whether there will be additional moves against the specific member states and others outside the EU that have DSTs. And if they're with the member states, I don't know if you want to comment at all whether the EU would retaliate in or think of a response as a union as opposed to Spain only, Italy only retaliating.
The thing is that if we introduce barriers to the supply chain when thinking about the car industry, we may find ourselves, I'm speaking in American terms, providing a big room to the cars being produced by China. If we start to introduce separate approaches depending on each member state, President Trump may find himself with a much more unified Europe, of course.
Yeah.
And I would say that it is important to respect and to assess the importance of having strong European Union. I say that we are boringly reliable, but I think that it is absolutely true. And I think that we may take longer times to take decisions, but it is important to be united in this common approach. And there were attempts in the past, in the most recent past, in the recent years, we had Putin trying to divide the European Union, and it was not the case. On the contrary, and the situation was really, really difficult, of course. But we know that this is one of the most important principles we need to stick on. The weakest part of Europe deserves the most attention of the rest of the European Union, because that means where our fragility may be. So we are going to remain united on that. Then there may be different approaches. I was, this morning when I woke up, I saw that the president of the Spanish government was announcing the national plan to support the eventually most affected industrial sectors or agriculture, farming sectors. And of course, that means that we need to develop solidarity with our European citizens and our European business, and we need to count on the common approach coming from the, let's call it, federal level, so the European Union level. There will be a political discussion on how we can respond to the proposals coming from the Commission, but of course, our intention is to have a united response and to assess what are the best avenues to respond to what it is happening, starting, as I said, as the President von der Leyen stated this morning, with, of course, the openness to work to avoid any type of conflict. So to identify what does this mean, where the misunderstandings may be, why we do not concentrate our efforts to solve problems instead of creating new problems, but we are not going to stay silent.
So let me ask about investment in the EU, because this was one of the biggest, I think, drivers of the competitiveness agenda, is making sure that the EU remains a place where companies want to invest. And you do have high energy prices, that's one thing, and that's part of your portfolio. And there has been, along with the Clean Industrial Deal that you talked about, there has been this affordable energy action plan. How do you see, what do you think the EU needs to do to be more investor friendly, and particularly in a time when it's very clear that President Trump wants companies to invest here? So how does Europe keep investment coming into Europe? And what do you do about whether it's the right type of investment that you want? I know that there are some discussions about some levels of Chinese investment in certain member states. So how does the EU become a place where people really want to go to invest and become investor friendly?
Okay, so my first minute is a publicity minute. So to say that we do not feel ourselves as being weak. We feel that we count on relevant strengths. an educated population with great capacity to develop, to innovate, and that we would like to retain, so retainment of talent, a huge capacity of savings, and this means that we need to accelerate the savings and investment union and to play much more with the European Investment Bank, probably the most capitalized bank in the world that could cover as a means of guarantees and backing the big investments at the European scale, or being supporting the most audacious investments in terms of how we can innovate in our industrial and energy portfolios, with big capacities to develop new technology solutions on energy, on water management, on the chemical industry, on green industrial products. So we need to bet and support. This turns back to the discussion being raised by Draghi and others. We may be lazy on how we could deepen into the energy union, the infrastructures union, the savings union, the capitals union. Now, we feel that we are brought to the cliff. So either we turn back and the whole European project blows up, or we build the bridge to become much more united in European terms. And that's our bet. That's what we want to do. For the investors, counting on these strengths, counting the security, on the predictability, on the reliability, on modern infrastructures, on logistics, I think it is worthy. Counting on a clear framework on how to combine the different levels of administration, the different levels of public or private investment is important. Betting into the future and not going back to the past to solve the problems of today is also an important signal. Speaking to the investors and to the industrial community, if you allow me, this is clean, this is industrial, but this is a deal. This is paying attention to where the concerns may be and how we can invest better and bring better everybody together. So I think that this is probably one of the, as I say, biggest priorities in this term, and we hope to be successful.
So in your meetings with industry, are you getting it's a different tack from what we often hear here in the United States, where green is not always seen as a driver for competitiveness. These technologies that you've identified and industries that you've identified, there is not always support for them to transition into the green economy, and it's not necessarily seen as the next wave of the economy. So it's a very different outlook. What's the reaction you've been getting from business, especially with the advent of the new commission and some of the measures like the omnibus and the clean industrial deal that you have taken so far that kind of show this path more clearly than the previous commission did?
So I think that there are messages that are being heard in a very clear manner. Please simplify the way we relate with the administration, the way we report about our obligations. Please stick to this clarity on how to ensure that we take the right decisions in terms of investments that may pay back in 5-10 years' time, but that we need to prepare, so to have a clear understanding on what we want to achieve. Please do help us to overcome this fragmentation of the single market that may be reflected in different ways in how we develop the permitting process, how we may be asking for slightly different things depending on the country, how we can count on the modern infrastructures that connect every telecom, energy demand all over the European territory, so to be sure that we can be smart in terms of the complementarities. And please, bet on innovation. Please do back the possibility to make mistakes and fail, because it is the only way to count on innovative solutions for the time to come. So I think that all of this is fair, but all of this is also connected to this physical question. The green driver is important, so we will need to come to the United States more often to explain what we do.
We have a question over here.
No, thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Christian Forstner, Hans Heidel Foundation. Coming back to competitiveness, yeah, Commissioner, do you need more competences at European level? And how do you interact with the member states? Because a lot of competitiveness is boosted and enhanced at member state level. So do you need more competences and your interaction with the member states?
Well, I think that this is part of what I try to cover with this more Europe, more union. And I cannot assess upfront how it is going to happen. But what we witness is that this is happening. It may be through mutual recognition. It may be through the development of new policies. It may be through the combination of the smartest decisions. But there are things that are quite obvious. If we need to modernize our transmission grids, are we going to go without understanding that there are backbones that do cover the whole European territory that should be tackled in a much more consistent and effective manner? If we are going to speak about housing, a big problem in Europe, and this is not industry, but it reflects also the real estate industry and the banking services and the infrastructure companies. There is not a single word about housing in the treaties or in the existing regulation. Right. But it is a concern being expressed by the people, how we can build the different aspects through the European policy. So I think that, yes, part of the answer is there. But let's think that now we speak a lot about security and defense. Mm-hmm. It has always been something around the European project. But we always thought that it was something that we could, well, take it easy. Now, we come into the real moment where we have to have this discussion. And now, probably, if we are pushed to the corner, still, we identify that we will need to have this discussion. We had the discussion in the energy field 3 years ago. We identified that there were weaknesses that we did not respond so effectively in the past to be prepared, to be resilient. So I think that this is an ongoing process that cannot be stopped and that will only be solved by deepening the commonalities and the union approach.
So unfortunately, that has to be our last question. There are many more questions on my iPad and more questions in my notes. So I hope that you will come back to Washington during a less stressful time. And because I think we really, particularly the clean industrial deal, your portfolio, there's going to be a lot going on this year to see how this does work. Can green really be the driver of innovation and competitiveness is the way I would put it. And I hope you will consider us at the Atlantic Council a place where you can come and have conversations about this issue. And we would love to see you come back when there's more, shall we say, data to hear of the progress of this interesting experiment. So, Madam Vice President, very many thanks for coming and joining us today. It has been extremely interesting to hear about the clean industrial deal and also your thoughts on competition policy versus competitiveness. And thank you for also being here during this particular week and being the face of the European Commission during this time in Washington.
Okay.
Thank you.